I never thought I'd be afraid in my own home. Not at 50. Not after surviving everything life threw at me. Losing my husband too young. Raising a child alone. Working 2 jobs until my hands went numb and my feet forgot what it felt like not to ache. I thought I'd earned my peace. I thought the hardest battles were behind me. I was wrong. The morning it happened, I woke up the same way I had for 30 years. Before dawn, while the world was still quiet and forgiving. My knees protested as I made my way down the hallway, the same hallway where I used to chase Daniel when he was small, where I'd hung his school pictures year after year, watching him grow from a gap-toothed boy into the man who now barely looked at me. The kitchen was my sanctuary, always had been. It was where I'd packed Daniel's lunches with notes tucked inside, where I'd sat with bills spread across the table, calculating which ones could wait another week, where I'd cried quietly after his father's funeral, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours before. That morning I just wanted coffee. Simple, normal, the kind of small comfort that makes you believe the day might be bearable. I reached for a mug from the cabinet, blue ceramic with a chip on the handle. I'd bought it years ago at a yard sale, back when every dollar mattered, back when I was still learning how to stretch a paycheck to cover rent and diapers and hope. It had become familiar, part of the landscape of my kitchen, part of my routine. I didn't know it was his favorite. He'd never told me. In the 6 months since he'd moved back in after his divorce, we barely spoke. Our conversations had become transactional. Dinner's ready. I'm going out. Did you pay the electric bill? The warmth we'd once shared had frozen into something I couldn't name. Something that made me feel like a guest in the home I'd sacrificed everything to keep. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavier than they used to be. He'd gained weight since the divorce, stopped caring about the things that used to matter to him. His appearance, his health, his relationships. Especially his relationship with me. "Good morning," I said, my voice careful, measured. I'd learned to speak to him like he was a stranger I didn't want to offend, someone whose mood could shift without warning. He didn't answer. He never did anymore. But when his eyes landed on the mug in my hands, something dark flickered across his face. "That's mine." His voice was flat, cold. "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't know." "Let me—" "You never know, do you?" He moved toward me, and I instinctively stepped back. "You never think. You just do whatever you want in this house, touching my things, getting in my way." My heart started racing. This wasn't about a mug. It couldn't be. But the rage in his eyes told me it was about everything. His failed marriage, his wounded pride, his need to blame someone for the life that hadn't turned out the way he'd planned. "Daniel, please. I'll use a different mug. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix anything, does it, Mom?" The way he said "Mom" made it sound like an insult, like the word itself was something shameful. I'd been called that name with love, with need, with the innocent trust of a child who believed his mother could fix anything. Now it was weaponized, turned against me. I should have seen what was coming. Maybe part of me did, but mothers aren't trained to defend themselves against their children. We're trained to protect them, to absorb their pain, to stand between them and the world's cruelty. We're not supposed to need protection from them. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The mug fell, shattering against the tile floor, the same floor I'd mopped 1,000 times, where Daniel had taken his first steps, where we'd danced together when he was small and still thought I was beautiful. "You need to learn to stay out of my way." I tried to pull back, but his grip tightened. "Daniel, you're hurting me." "Good." That single word broke something in me that I didn't know could break. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the realization that my son, the boy I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the child I'd protected from every hurt I could shield him from, wanted me to suffer. He pushed me. Not hard, not at first, just enough to make me stumble backward. My body, older now, slower, couldn't catch itself the way it used to. My foot caught on the edge of the rug, the one I'd bought to cover the worn patch in the linoleum, and suddenly I was falling. The stairs seemed to stretch forever. Each impact sent a new shock of pain through my body, my hip, my shoulder, my ribs. I tried to grab the railing, but my fingers couldn't hold on. The world became a blur of motion and agony, and all I could think was, "This is my son. This is my boy. This is the child I would have died for." and he's killing me. I don't know how long I lay at the bottom of the stairs. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only pain and the strange, detached observation that the ceiling needed painting. How many times had I noticed that and promised myself I'd get to it when I had time? I heard his footsteps above me, slow, deliberate. He appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at me like I was something that had spilled, something inconvenient that would need to be cleaned up. "Now you'll stay out of my way," he said, his voice as casual as if he were commenting on the weather. Then he turned and walked away. I heard his bedroom door close, heard him turn on his television, heard him laugh at something on the screen while I lay broken on the floor of the home I'd worked myself to exhaustion to provide for him. I wanted to cry out, to call for help, but pride, stupid, stubborn pride, kept me silent. What would I say? What would I tell people? That my son had pushed me down the stairs? That the child I'd raised alone, sacrificed everything for, had looked at me with hatred and hurt me deliberately? Who would believe me? And even if they did, what would it change? I managed to crawl to the phone eventually. Each movement sent fire through my ribs. I called Mrs. Peterson from next door, told her I'd fallen, asked if she could help me to my car so I could drive myself to the clinic. I didn't mention Daniel. I couldn't bear to. At the hospital, they asked what happened. I said I slipped. They looked at me with that expression healthcare workers get when they suspect something but can't prove it, can't push too hard without making things worse. They wrapped my ribs, gave me pain medication, told me I was lucky nothing was broken. Lucky. When I came home, Daniel was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Went out with friends. There's leftover pizza in the fridge if you're hungry. As if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't watched his mother fall down the stairs and felt nothing but satisfaction. I sat in my kitchen, in the home I'd built with broken hands and an unbreakable will, and realized that love wasn't always enough. Sometimes it was the very thing that destroyed you. But I wasn't ready to be destroyed. Not yet. If you enjoy emotional stories like this, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and it really helps our work. And comment with your city so we know where you're watching from. The weeks that followed the fall were a strange kind of hell. The kind where everything looks normal on the surface, where neighbors wave and the mailman delivers packages and the sun rises and sets, like the world hasn't fundamentally changed. But in my house, in the space between my son and me, something had died that I didn't know how to mourn. I couldn't tell anyone what really happened. How do you explain that your child, the one you carried, birthed, raised, has become someone you're afraid of? How do you admit that the love you thought was unbreakable has not just broken, but shattered into something sharp and dangerous? Daniel acted as if the incident never occurred. He moved through the house like I was furniture, something to navigate around but never acknowledge. When we did interact, his words were clipped, efficient, devoid of anything resembling affection or concern. "Did you wash my work shirts?" he'd ask, standing in my bedroom doorway while I tried to rest my aching ribs. "They're in your closet," I'd answer, keeping my voice neutral, trying not to show how much it hurt to breathe, to speak, to exist in his presence. "Next time, use the fabric softener I like. The one you bought makes my skin itch." No, thank you. No acknowledgement that I was doing his laundry while recovering from injuries he'd caused. Just complaints, criticisms, demands. My sister called one afternoon, her voice bright with the kind of oblivious cheerfulness that comes from not knowing your world has collapsed. "How's Daniel doing?" she asked. "I heard about the divorce. Poor thing. It must be so hard for him. Poor thing." As if he was the victim. As if moving back into his childhood home rent-free, having his mother cook and clean for him while he rebuilt his life, was some kind of tragedy. "He's managing," I said carefully. "And you? How are you holding up? It must be wonderful to have him home again. I know how much you missed him." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I was terrified in my own house, that I slept with my door locked now, that I'd started keeping important documents in my bedroom because I didn't trust what he might do if he was angry enough. But I couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. "It's different than I expected," I managed. "Oh, Margaret, you always were so independent. I bet you love having someone to take care of again. It's what you were always best at, taking care of people. Yes, that's what I was good at. Taking care of everyone else while slowly disappearing myself. Daniel's friends started coming over. They'd gather in the living room, my living room, and talk about their lives, their problems, their ex-wives and ungrateful children, and all the ways the world had failed them. They'd leave their beer bottles on the coffee table I'd refinished myself, drop cigarette ash on the carpet despite my request that they smoke outside, and look through me when I walked through carrying laundry or groceries. One evening, I asked them politely if they could keep the noise down. It was late, and I had to work early the next morning. Daniel's friend Mark laughed. "She still bossing you around, Dan? Man, I thought you said you were finally free." "Don't worry about it," Daniel said, not looking at me. "She's going to bed anyway. Aren't you, Mom?" It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal. In my own home, I was being sent to my room like a child. I just thought, "Go to bed, Mom. We'll keep it down." They didn't keep it down. Their laughter echoed through the house until after midnight. I lay in my bed, feeling every one of my 50 years, every injury from the fall, every ache that age and hard work had carved into my body, and wondered how I'd become a stranger in the life I'd built. At church, Mrs. Chen asked about the bruises that had bloomed across my arms, purple and yellow testimonies to my collision with the stairs. "Oh, you know me," I said with a smile I'd practiced in the mirror. Clumsy as ever. Took a tumble down the stairs. "You need to be more careful, Margaret. At our age, falls can be serious." Our age. As if 50 meant I was fragile, breakable, disposable. "I will. Thank you for your concern." She patted my hand, her eyes kind but not curious. People don't want to know the truth if it's uncomfortable. They want the easy answer, the simple explanation that lets them move on with their day without carrying someone else's pain. The truth was becoming clear to me in ways I'd spent months avoiding. Daniel didn't just resent me, he blamed me. For his divorce, for his disappointments, for every way his life hadn't met his expectations. And I was convenient, available, unable to leave because this was my home, legally and emotionally bound to him in ways that gave him power he wielded without mercy. One morning, I made breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, the same meal I'd made him 1,000 times when he was growing up, rushing to get ready for school while I packed his lunch and checked his homework. He came down, looked at the plate I'd set out for him, and pushed it away. "I'm not hungry, but you need to eat something. You've got a long day." I said I'm not hungry. His voice was sharp, cutting. "Stop trying to mother me. I'm not a child. I know you're not. You just what? You just can't help yourself? You just need to feel needed? Is that it?" His words hit harder than the push down the stairs, because there was truth in them, twisted and weaponized, but truth nonetheless. I had always found my worth in caring for him, in being necessary to his life, and now he was telling me that my value, the thing I'd built my entire identity around, was unwanted. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "You're always sorry, but you never change." He left the house without another word. The eggs grew cold on the plate. I threw them away and cleaned the kitchen with mechanical efficiency, my hands remembering the motions even as my mind struggled to process the cruelty of someone I'd loved unconditionally. That afternoon, I found myself looking at old photo albums, pictures of Daniel as a baby, as a toddler, as a teenager. In every image, I was there, holding him, hugging him, standing beside him with pride evident in every line of my face. His father was in some of the early photos before cancer took him, but mostly it was just us, mother and son, a team, partners in survival. When had that changed? When had love turned to resentment? When had my son started seeing me as an obstacle instead of an ally? I didn't have answers. All I had were these photos and the growing realization that the boy in these pictures was gone. The man who'd replaced him was a stranger wearing a familiar face, and that stranger wanted me to disappear. But I'd spent too many years fighting to survive to simply fade away, because it would make someone else's life more comfortable. I'd buried a husband, raised a child alone, worked jobs that destroyed my body and tested my spirit. I'd earned my place in this world, in this house. Daniel might have forgotten that, but I was beginning to remember. I tried. God knows I tried. I started leaving notes around the house, cheerful little reminders written on sticky paper. the kind of thing I used to do when Daniel was in college and feeling overwhelmed. "You've got this. So proud of you. Remember to smile today." He tore them down without reading them. I found them crumpled in the trash, my handwriting barely visible on the wadded paper. I cooked his favorite meals. The pot roast he used to request for birthdays. The chocolate chip cookies he'd sneak from the cooling rack when he thought I wasn't looking. The chicken soup I'd made whenever he was sick. I'd spend hours in the kitchen, my ribs still aching from the fall, trying to recreate the comfort foods of his childhood. He'd eat in his room or take the food to go, barely acknowledging the effort. Once I heard him tell a friend on the phone, "Yeah, she's still trying to buy my forgiveness with food." Pathetic, right? Pathetic. That's what I'd become in his eyes. I attempted conversations, asked about his day, his job search, his plans for the future. Simple things, the kind of questions any mother might ask. "Why do you care?" He'd snap. "It's not like you can help. You barely understand how the world works anymore." Each dismissal was a small death. Each cruel word carved away another piece of the person I used to be, until I started to wonder if he was right. Maybe I was out of touch. Maybe my attempts at connection were unwelcome intrusions into a life that had no room for me anymore. The final humiliation came on his birthday. I'd planned for weeks, saved money from my meager paycheck to buy him something special. A watch. Not expensive, but nice. The kind of thing a young professional should have. I'd wrapped it carefully, written a heartfelt card telling him how proud I was of the man he'd become, how much I believed in his future. I placed it on the kitchen table with a homemade cake. His favorite, lemon with cream cheese frosting. I'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to bake it before my shift, decorating it with the same care I'd given every birthday cake for the past 30 years. When he came downstairs, his friends were with him. They were going out, he announced. Some club downtown where they could forget their problems and pretend they were young and carefree. "I made you a cake," I said, gesturing to the table. "And I got you a little something." He glanced at the setup with barely concealed contempt. "I'm not 12 anymore, Mom. I don't need birthday parties." His friends laughed. One of them, the same Mark who'd mocked me before, said, "Aw, come on, Dan. Don't be rude. Your mom tried." Tried. Past tense. Failed. "Fine." Daniel walked to the table, picked up the gift without ceremony, and tore open the wrapping. When he saw the watch, something flickered across his face. For a moment, I thought it might be appreciation, maybe even love, but then he laughed. A cold, harsh sound that made my chest tighten. "A watch? Seriously? Mom, this is from Walmart. Did you think I'd actually wear this?" I just wanted you to have something nice. Something nice would be giving me space. Something nice would be understanding that I'm an adult who doesn't need his mother trying to fix his life with cheap gifts and homemade cake." He dropped the watch on the table. It made a small clattering sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Thanks anyway." The words were mechanical, meaningless. They left. All of them, laughing and joking as they walked out the door, leaving me standing in my kitchen with a cake no one would eat and a gift no one wanted. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the watch. I'd spent 2 weeks' worth of grocery money on it, money I couldn't really spare, but I'd wanted him to know that I still saw him as someone worth celebrating, worth honoring, worth loving. Later that night, I found the card I'd written him in the trash. Not even opened, just thrown away with the wrapping paper and the box, as if my words, my feelings, my love, were garbage to be discarded. The neighbors started noticing. Mrs. Peterson asked if everything was all right. She'd heard shouting. I assured her we were fine, just the normal friction of 2 adults learning to live together again. At work, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Margaret, is everything okay at home? You seem distracted, tired." How could I explain? How could I tell her that I was exhausted from walking on eggshells in my own home, from trying to make myself small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough to avoid triggering my son's anger? "I'm fine," I lied, just adjusting to having Daniel back home. "Well, if you need to talk." But I didn't talk, because talking would make it real. Talking would mean admitting that I'd failed somehow, that the child I'd poured my life into had grown into someone who despised me. The comparisons were the worst part. Daniel started talking about his ex-wife constantly, always in the context of how much better she was than me. Kelly always knew when to give me space, he'd say. She understood that a man needs independence. Kelly was ambitious. She had goals. She didn't just settle for working at a grocery store her whole life. Kelly kept herself up. She went to the gym, wore makeup, cared about her appearance. Each comparison was a knife, twisting deeper. As if loving him, sacrificing for him, working myself to exhaustion to provide for him, wasn't enough. I should have also been thinner, prettier, more successful, more ambitious. I should have been someone else entirely. One evening I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had I gotten so old? When had these lines carved themselves around my eyes, these shadows taken up residence beneath them? My hair, which I used to take pride in, hung limp and lifeless. My clothes, practical and comfortable, suddenly seemed shabby, outdated. I was 50 years old, and I looked every day of it. I looked tired, worn, used up. Maybe Daniel was right to be ashamed of me. The thought came unbidden, unwanted, but once it arrived, I couldn't shake it. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd held him back with my limited vision, my working-class mentality, my inability to dream bigger than survival. I started eating my meals in my bedroom. It was easier than sitting at the table, trying to make conversation with someone who looked at me like I was a burden. Easier than watching him scroll through his phone, ignoring my presence, making it clear that my company was something to be endured rather than enjoyed. I became a ghost in my own home. I kept to my room, emerged only to cook and clean, tried to make my presence as unobtrusive as possible. I learned his schedule, planned my movements around his, did everything I could to stay out of his way, but it was never enough. One night, I was washing dishes, quietly, carefully, trying not to make any noise that might disturb him. He came into the kitchen, his face already twisted with anger. "Do you have to do that now? I'm trying to watch TV. I'm sorry. I'll be done in just a minute." "You're always sorry, but you keep doing it. It's like you want to annoy me." "No, Daniel, I don't want—" "Just shut up!" The words exploded from him, loud enough to make me flinch. "Just shut up and leave me alone!" I stood there, my hands submerged in soapy water, and felt something crack inside me. Not my heart this time. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together. I realized in that moment that it didn't matter what I did. I could make myself invisible, could anticipate his every need, could sacrifice everything I had left, and it would never be enough, because the problem wasn't my behavior. It was my existence. My son didn't just resent me, he wished I didn't exist. And for the first time since the fall, I wondered if he was right, if everyone would be better off if I simply disappeared. But even as that dark thought whispered through my mind, something else stirred. Something small, but stubborn. Something that had survived my husband's death, poverty, loneliness, and every hardship life had thrown at me. It was the part of me that refused to quit. The part that had gotten up every morning for 30 years, had worked until my hands bled, had loved even when love brought nothing but pain. That part whispered, "Not yet. You're not done yet." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I could possibly do to change my situation. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt something that might have been determination. There are moments in life when you realize you've reached a bottom you didn't know existed. For me, it came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I found myself sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot, unable to remember why I'd come. I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, watching raindrops race down the windshield, thinking about nothing and everything. My shift had ended an hour ago. I should have been home starting dinner, but the thought of walking through that front door, of navigating the minefield that my own house had become, was more than I could bear. What was the point? I could make dinner or not make dinner. Daniel would either eat it without acknowledgement or criticize it for not being what he wanted. I could clean or not clean. He'd find fault either way. I could exist or not exist. And the only difference would be whether his contempt had a target. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Where's dinner? I'm hungry." Not, "Hi, Mom." Not, "How was your day?" Not even basic courtesy. Just a demand. as if I existed solely to serve his needs. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I drove home because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt darker somehow, even with all the lights on. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'd gotten so used to feeling hollow that I projected that emptiness onto everything around me. The walls seemed to close in. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I made spaghetti. Simple, quick. The kind of meal that required minimal thought. My hands moved through the familiar motions while my mind drifted somewhere else entirely. I was there, but not there. Present, but absent. Alive, but not living. Finally, Daniel said when I called him to dinner. He sat down without looking at me, served himself without a word of thanks, and ate while scrolling through his phone. I sat across from him, pushing pasta around my plate, unable to eat. My appetite had disappeared weeks ago, along with my ability to taste anything but bitterness. "This is overcooked," he said, not looking up from his screen. "I'm sorry. You always say that. Doesn't change anything, does it?" No, it didn't. Nothing changed. Every day was the same. Wake up, try to avoid conflict, fail, go to bed, repeat. I was stuck in a cycle of quiet suffering with no exit in sight. That night I lay in bed and thought about my life, really thought about it, in a way I'd been avoiding for months. What did I have to show for 50 years on this earth? A house I was terrified in. A son who hated me. A body that hurt constantly, worn down by years of hard work and recent trauma. Debts I could barely manage on my salary. No savings, no retirement plan, no hope of things getting better. I'd worked so hard. From the moment my husband died and left me with a 2-year-old and a mountain of medical bills, I'd worked. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, night shifts, weekends, holidays. Whatever it took to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I'd sacrificed everything for Daniel. My youth, my health, any chance at a life of my own. I'd dated occasionally over the years, but never seriously. I couldn't afford to be distracted from my purpose, which was giving my son the best life I could manage. And for what? So he could grow up to despise me? So he could throw everything I'd given him back in my face and demand more? The bedroom window looked out onto the street. I could see other houses, warm lights glowing in windows, families moving behind curtains, normal people living normal lives, people who belonged in their own homes, who weren't afraid of their own children. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt happy, really happy, not just the absence of immediate pain. It had been years, maybe decades. Happiness had become something other people experienced, something I witnessed from a distance but never participated in. The photo on my nightstand caught my eye, Daniel's high school graduation. We were both smiling in the picture, his arm around my shoulders, my eyes shining with pride. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She'd believed that hard work and love could overcome anything. She'd been naive. I picked up the frame, ran my finger along the edge. When I set it back down, I turned it face down. I couldn't bear to look at that false happiness anymore. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in the darkness, listening to Daniel move around the house. His footsteps, his laughter as he talked on the phone with friends, his life continuing as if I didn't exist. Around 3 a.m, I heard him leave. The front door closed quietly, like he was trying not to wake me. Or maybe he just didn't care enough to worry about the noise. His car started, the engine fading as he drove away to whatever was more important than coming home at a decent hour. I got up and walked through the silent house. It felt like walking through a museum of my own life. Every object, every piece of furniture, every photograph telling the story of someone I used to be. The living room couch where Daniel had taken his first steps. The coffee table where we'd played board games on rainy afternoons. The kitchen where I'd taught him to bake cookies. His small hands covered in flour. His laughter filling the spaces between us. All of it felt like lies now. Pretty memories masking an ugly truth, that I had given everything to someone who valued none of it. I found myself in the garage, looking at boxes of old belongings I'd saved over the years. Daniel's baby clothes, his report cards, his art projects from elementary school, paintings and drawings I'd praised and treasured because they came from his hands. I pulled out a Mother's Day card from when he was 8. The front showed a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. Inside, in his careful child's handwriting, "Mom, you are the best. I love you to the moon and back. Love, Daniel." The moon and back. Once upon a time, his love had been infinite. Or maybe it had never been real at all. Maybe I'd just been useful to him then. And now that he was grown, I'd outlived my purpose. I sat on the cold garage floor, surrounded by boxes of memories that meant nothing anymore, and finally let myself cry. Not quiet tears, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep I hadn't known it existed. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the dreams I'd abandoned, for the love I'd wasted on someone who couldn't return it. I cried until I had nothing left, until I was empty, hollowed out, a shell of a person with nothing inside but echoes of pain. When the tears finally stopped, I felt different. Not better, different. Lighter, maybe, but in the way that comes from losing something essential, like a tree stripped of its leaves, bare and vulnerable to whatever storm came next. I made a decision that night, sitting in the cold garage at 4 a.m. I would stop trying, stop hoping, stop believing that love and effort could fix what was irreparably broken. I would become what Daniel wanted me to be, invisible. I would do my duties, cook, clean, pay my share of the bills, but nothing more. No more attempts at connection, no more gestures of love, no more hoping for something that would never come. I would protect myself the only way I knew how, by caring less, by wanting less, by expecting nothing and therefore never being disappointed. It felt like giving up, but it also felt like survival. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that I couldn't appreciate, I made myself a promise. I would endure. I would survive. Not because I had hope that things would get better, but because I was too stubborn to let this destroy me completely. Daniel wanted me to disappear? Fine, I would disappear. But I still had something he didn't know about. Something he'd forgotten in his cruelty and his certainty that he'd broken me completely. I still had myself, and somewhere, buried beneath all the pain and exhaustion and despair, that stubborn woman who'd survived everything life had thrown at her was still alive. She was quiet now, silent, waiting, but she wasn't gone. Something shifted in me after that night in the garage. It wasn't hope. Hope felt too fragile, too dangerous. It was something colder, harder, something that felt like steel forming in my spine. I started watching, really watching. I'd spent months trying to connect with Daniel, to understand what had changed in him, to find the son I remembered beneath the cruelty. But now I stopped looking for who he used to be and started seeing who he actually was. And what I saw wasn't pretty. I noticed how he manipulated his friends, playing victim when it suited him, bragging about his mistreatment of me when he thought I couldn't hear. I heard him on the phone, lying to his ex-wife about finances, to his job contacts about his qualifications, to everyone about everything. He was a liar, a user, someone who took what he wanted and justified it with whatever story made him look best. How had I not seen it before? Or had I seen it and simply made excuses because he was my son? Because mothers are supposed to believe the best about their children. I started documenting things. Not consciously at first. I'd always kept a journal. Just notes about my day, my thoughts. A way to process the loneliness that had defined most of my adult life. But now those notes took on a different quality. March 15th. Daniel demanded I pay for repairs on his car. When I said I couldn't afford it, he called me selfish and said I never supported him. March 22nd. Found him going through my purse. He took $40. When I confronted him, he said I owed him for all the years he had to live in poverty because I couldn't keep a man around. March 30th. He shoved me into the wall when I asked him to clean up after himself. Left a bruise on my shoulder shaped like his handprint. The words on paper looked different than the memories in my head. Starker, uglier, harder to explain away or justify. I started keeping receipts too. Every bill I paid, every expense for the household, every penny I spent trying to keep us afloat while Daniel spent his money on going out, on new clothes, on things he wanted but didn't need. I wasn't sure why I was documenting everything. Some instinct told me I might need proof someday. Proof that I'd tried. Proof that I wasn't the problem. Proof that the person I was becoming, hard, watchful, defensive, was a response to real danger, not paranoia or mental illness. My mother's voice came back to me. She'd died when I was 25, too young to have absorbed all her wisdom. But something stuck. "Margaret," she'd said once, "being kind doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is protect yourself from people who want to hurt you." At the time, she'd been talking about a boyfriend I'd had, a charming man who turned mean when he drank. I'd left him after that conversation. I wish I could tell her that her words had finally reached me again, decades later, when I needed them most. I started researching tenant rights, property laws, anything that might help me understand my legal position. The house was in my name. I'd bought it with my late husband's life insurance and my own savings before Daniel was even born. Daniel had never contributed to the mortgage, had never paid rent. Legally, he was a guest in my home. But emotionally? Emotionally, I was the one who felt like I didn't belong. I found a website for domestic abuse survivors. At first, I resisted the idea that I qualified. Abuse was something that happened in other families, to other people. I was just dealing with a difficult adult child. That was normal, wasn't it? Everyone struggled with their grown kids sometimes. But as I read through the descriptions, the patterns, the warning signs, I saw my own life reflected back at me. Does your family member make you feel afraid? Yes. Do they control your movements or activities? I'd started planning my entire day around avoiding him. Have they physically hurt you? The fall, the shove, the casual violence that came so easily to him now. Do they blame you for their problems? Every day. Do they make you feel worthless? I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like I had value. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. Seeing it spelled out like that, in clinical terms on a website designed to help people escape dangerous situations, made something click into place. I was in danger. In my own home, from my own child, I was in danger. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, it clarified things. Fear has a funny way of sharpening your focus, of cutting through all the emotional confusion and leaving you with simple facts. Fact: I owned this house. Fact: Daniel was legally a tenant with no rights to the property. Fact: I had documentation of his abuse. Fact: I didn't have to live this way. I started making copies of everything: the deed to the house, the mortgage documents showing I was the sole owner, my journal entries, photos of the bruises I'd been hiding under long sleeves. I kept them at work, in a locked drawer in my supervisor's office after explaining that I was dealing with a difficult family situation and needed a safe place to store important documents. She didn't ask questions. The understanding in her eyes told me she'd seen this before, maybe even lived it herself. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one where Daniel had no access, no knowledge. I started depositing my paychecks there, paying my share of household expenses from what little remained in the old joint account. It wasn't much, I was barely making ends meet, but it was mine, secret, safe. One evening, I was in my room when I heard Daniel on the phone with his ex-wife. His voice carried through the thin walls, angry and entitled. "You're being unreasonable, Kelly. I need that money. It's my inheritance. My dad left it to both of us." I froze. Inheritance? My late husband had no inheritance to leave. Everything he'd had went to paying his medical bills. Unless... I pulled out an old box from my closet, the one containing all our important documents. There, beneath yellowed hospital bills and funeral expenses, I found it. My husband's life insurance paperwork, the $50,000 that had allowed me to buy this house, to give Daniel stability after his father's death. The beneficiaries listed Margaret Morrison, wife, and Daniel Morrison, son. But Daniel had been 2 years old. I'd used the entire amount for our family, the house, setting up his college fund, making sure we could survive. I'd never told him about the life insurance because it hadn't seemed relevant. It was our money, used for our family. Now he was telling his ex-wife he had an inheritance he'd never received. Was he planning to claim I'd stolen from him? I took photos of the documents, added them to my growing file. Every lie he told, every manipulation, every piece of evidence that showed the real Daniel. I documented it all. I wasn't planning anything specific. Not yet. I was just preparing. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. But after years of being caught off guard, of being hurt by things I didn't see coming, I was determined to never be unprepared again. Daniel noticed the change in me. How could he not? I'd stopped trying to please him, stopped flinching when he raised his voice, stopped apologizing for existing. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded one night when I didn't jump to serve him dinner the moment he walked in the door. "Nothing," I said calmly. "Dinner's on the stove. Help yourself." His eyes narrowed. "You're acting weird." "I'm tired, Daniel. That's all." It wasn't a lie. I was tired. Bone deep, soul tired. Tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. But I was also awake for the first time in months. Aware. Alert. He didn't like it. He was used to me being passive, accepting, endlessly accommodating. This new version of me, quiet but not yielding, present but not engaged, confused him. Good. Let him be confused. Let him wonder what had changed. I had stopped being the mother who would sacrifice anything for her child. Not because I didn't love him. Somewhere buried beneath all the pain and fear, I suppose I still did. But I loved myself more now. Or at least I was learning to. That night, I added one more entry to my journal. April 12th. Today, I realized I don't have to keep living like this. The house is mine. The power is mine. I've just been too afraid to use it. But I'm not afraid anymore. Or maybe I am afraid. But I'm more angry than scared now. And anger can be useful, if you point it in the right direction. I closed the journal and locked it away. Outside my window, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, normal people living normal lives. Soon, I thought, soon I'd be one of them again. But first, I had some planning to do, because it wasn't enough to just survive anymore. I wanted my life back. I wanted my home back. I wanted my dignity back. And I was finally ready to fight for it. I made an appointment with a lawyer, a real estate attorney who specialized in landlord-tenant disputes, someone who could tell me exactly where I stood legally. Her name was Rachel Chen, and her office was modest but professional, the kind of place that served people like me, working folks who needed help, but couldn't afford the big downtown firms with their marble lobbies and $100 an hour parking. I brought my box of documents, everything I'd collected, the house deed, mortgage papers, my journal, photos of bruises, bank statements showing I paid all the household expenses. Rachel listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The fall down the stairs, the verbal abuse, the financial manipulation, Daniel's refusal to leave or contribute anything while treating my home like his personal domain. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you afraid of your son?" The question hung in the air. I'd never said it out loud before. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'm afraid of him." She nodded, making notes on her legal pad. "What you're describing is domestic abuse. The fact that he's your adult child doesn't change that. You have the right to feel safe in your own home. But he's my son. He's an adult who is abusing his parent. The law doesn't distinguish. You have rights, Mrs. Morrison. Strong ones." She explained my options. Since I owned the house outright and Daniel had never had any legal claim to it, I could evict him. There would be a process. I'd have to give him proper notice, file paperwork with the court, but it was absolutely within my rights as the property owner. "What about the life insurance?" I asked, showing her the documents. "He's been telling people I stole his inheritance." Rachel reviewed the papers carefully. "You were co-beneficiaries, but you were also his legal guardian at the time. You used the money for his benefit, housing, education, basic needs. That's not theft. That's parenting. If he tries to claim otherwise, these documents prove the money was used appropriately." For the first time in months, I felt something like relief. "How long would the eviction take?" I asked. "If he doesn't contest it, about 30 days from when you serve him notice. If he fights it, could be 2 to 3 months. But given what you've documented here," she tapped the pile of papers, "I don't think any judge would let him stay, especially with evidence of physical abuse." I left her office with a folder full of information and a plan, a real plan, not just vague hopes that things would somehow get better on their own. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed to be certain. I needed to be prepared for every possible reaction Daniel might have. So I waited, and I watched. And I continued documenting everything. Daniel sensed something was different. He'd grown comfortable in his cruelty, used to me absorbing whatever he dished out. But now, I was distant in a way that clearly bothered him. "Why are you being so cold?" he demanded one evening. I looked at him calmly. "I'm not being cold. I'm being appropriate." "Appropriate? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm treating you the way you treat me, with distance and respect for boundaries." His face reddened. "You're my mother. You're supposed to—" "I'm supposed to what, Daniel? Let you abuse me? Support you financially while you contribute nothing? Be grateful for your presence in my home?" The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth. Strong, true. "I'm not abusing you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You pushed me down the stairs. You've shoved me. You've taken my money. You've made me afraid in my own home. What would you call that?" He sputtered, clearly not used to being confronted. "You're being dramatic. You fell because you're clumsy, and I only borrowed money because you owe me—" "I don't owe you anything, Daniel. I've given you everything I had, and you've thrown it back in my face." I walked away before he could respond, my heart pounding but my steps steady. That night, he destroyed the living room. I heard the crashes from my bedroom, furniture overturned, glass breaking, his voice roaring with rage. I locked my door and called the police. When the officers arrived, Daniel was calm, composed. "I'm sorry, officers. I was moving some furniture and knocked some things over. My mother gets confused sometimes, thinks normal noises are emergencies. But I'd prepared for this too." I showed them my journal, the photos, told them about the fall, showed them the medical records I'd requested from the hospital. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, took me aside. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges for the assault down the stairs?" I hesitated. Pressing charges felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I thought about the woman in Rachel Chen's office, the one who'd finally decided to protect herself. "Not tonight," I said. "But I want this documented. I want it on record." She nodded. "We'll file a report. If anything else happens, call us immediately. And please, consider getting a restraining order." After the police left, Daniel locked himself in his room. The house was quiet except for the sound of glass crunching under my feet as I cleaned up the destruction. Each piece of broken glass I swept up felt symbolic. These were the pieces of our relationship, shattered beyond repair. Dangerous now if I tried to hold on to them. I threw it all away. The next morning, I went back to Rachel Chen's office. "I'm ready," I told her. "I want him out. I want my home back." She smiled. Not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. "Then let's get started." We prepared the eviction notice together. 30 days to vacate the premises. Legal, formal, unambiguous. "When you serve this," Rachel advised, "make sure you're not alone. Have a friend present, or ask the police to do a civil standby. His reaction could be extreme." I thought about asking Mrs. Peterson to be there, but I didn't want to put her in danger. Instead, I arranged for the police to be present when I served the notice. The papers sat in my purse for 2 days while I gathered my courage. This was it, the point of no return. Once I gave him that notice, everything would change. There would be no pretending anymore, no possibility of reconciliation. But then I asked myself, reconciliation to what? To being afraid? To being abused? To living like a prisoner in my own home? No. Some things couldn't be reconciled. Some relationships were too broken to fix. On a Thursday morning, with 2 police officers standing in my living room, I handed Daniel the eviction notice. He read it once, twice, his face going through a range of emotions. Disbelief, rage, and finally, calculation. "You can't do this," he said. "I'm your son, and this is my house. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone what kind of mother you are. You'll what, Daniel? Tell them I finally stood up to your abuse? Tell them I stopped letting you hurt me? Go ahead. I have documentation of everything you've done, medical records, police reports, witnesses." I saw the moment he realized I was serious, that I wasn't the broken, frightened woman he'd been terrorizing for months. "Mom, please. You stopped being my son the day you pushed me down those stairs," I said quietly. "You became someone I don't know, someone I'm afraid of. And I won't live in fear anymore. The police officers escorted him to his room to pack some immediate necessities. He could come back for the rest, they explained, but he needed to leave now. As he walked out with his bags, he turned back one more time. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I won't." And I knew it was true. After the door closed behind him, I sat in my living room, and felt the silence settle around me like a blessing. It wasn't over yet. I knew there would be more to deal with, more confrontations, more attempts at manipulation. But for the first time in months, I was alone in my house without fear, and it felt like coming home. Daniel didn't go quietly. The next morning, I woke to find my car keyed, deep gouges spelling out words I won't repeat. He'd come back during the night, unable to resist one more act of cruelty. I took pictures, added them to my file, called the police. "This is harassment," the officer told me, the same kind woman from before. "You can add this to your restraining order petition." "I don't have one yet." "Mrs. Morrison, you need one. Today. This is only going to escalate." She was right. I went to the courthouse that afternoon and filed for a restraining order, presenting all my documentation, the journal entries, the photos, the medical records, the police reports. The clerk's eyes widened as she reviewed everything. "The hearing is set for next Tuesday," she told me. "A judge will review your petition and hear from both parties." Both parties. That meant Daniel would be there. We'd be in the same room, and I'd have to face him. But I wouldn't be alone. Rachel agreed to come with me, and Mrs. Peterson, bless her heart, insisted on being there for support. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. Daniel called constantly, his messages alternating between rage and manipulation. "How could you do this to me? I'm your son. You'll be sorry. Everyone will know what kind of person you really are. Please, Mom, can't we talk about this? I'll change. I promise I'll change." I didn't respond. Rachel had advised me not to engage, to save everything for the court. On Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully. A simple blue dress, modest but dignified. I wanted the judge to see me as I was, a working woman, a mother pushed beyond her limits, someone seeking not revenge, but safety. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and echoes and serious-faced people hurrying through hallways with important papers. But Rachel guided me through the process, helping me find the right courtroom, explaining what would happen. "Just tell the truth," she said. "That's all you need to do." Daniel was already there when we entered, sitting with a lawyer he must have hired. He looked put together, professional, nothing like the rage-filled man who destroyed my living room or keyed my car. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw the boy I'd raised, the child who'd once loved me. But then his expression hardened, and I saw only the stranger who'd taken his place. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Williams presiding. Judge Williams was a black woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She reviewed the petition, looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at the documents. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "please tell me in your own words why you're seeking this restraining order." I stood, my legs trembling but my voice steady, and I told her everything. I told her about the fall down the stairs, lifting my shirt to show the scars that remained. I told her about the fear, the verbal abuse, the financial manipulation. I told her about finding my car vandalized, about the threatening messages, about living in terror in my own home. I didn't cry. I didn't exaggerate. I just spoke the truth, plain and simple. Daniel's lawyer tried to interrupt, but Judge Williams silenced him with a look. "You'll have your turn," she said. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have documentation to support these claims?" Rachel presented the file, the journal, the photos, the police reports, the medical records, the bank statements, everything I'd collected over months of careful documentation. Judge Williams reviewed it all in silence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to respond?" Daniel stood, and for a moment, I saw him preparing to lie, to manipulate, to play the victim as he'd done so many times before. But Judge Williams's expression stopped him. This was a woman who'd seen every variation of domestic abuse, every excuse, every manipulation. She wasn't going to be swayed by charm or lies. I I lost my temper sometimes, he admitted. But she's exaggerating. It wasn't as bad as she's making it sound. You pushed your mother down the stairs, Judge Williams said, her voice cold. That resulted in injuries requiring medical attention. Is that correct? It was an accident. An accident? She picked up one of the photos, the one showing the bruises on my arms shaped like fingerprints. These look deliberate to me. Daniel's lawyer tried to intervene, to spin some explanation, but the judge cut him off. I've seen enough, she said. Mrs. Morrison, I'm granting your restraining order. Mr. Morrison, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from your mother, her home, and her workplace. You are not to contact her directly or indirectly. You have 10 days to retrieve your remaining belongings, and that must be done with a police escort. She paused, looking directly at Daniel. You're a grown man who physically assaulted his mother in her own home, the woman who raised you, who worked herself to exhaustion to provide for you. And now you're harassing her for choosing her own safety over your comfort. I find your behavior contemptible. The words rang through the courtroom. Daniel's face went white, then red. Your Honor, his lawyer began. I'm not finished. Judge Williams's voice was steel. I'm also ordering you to attend anger management counseling. If you violate this order in any way, you will face criminal charges. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel mumbled. Mrs. Morrison, the judge turned to me, her expression softening slightly. I'm sorry you've had to endure this. No parent should fear their child. You did the right thing by seeking help. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we left the courtroom, Daniel tried to approach me, but the bailiff stopped him. The order is in effect immediately, sir. Step back. I walked out with Rachel and Mrs. Peterson on either side of me, my head high. Outside, the sun was shining. Birds were singing. The world looked the same as it had that morning, but everything had changed. How do you feel? Rachel asked. I thought about it. I felt tired, sad, relieved, angry, hopeful, all of it at once. Free, I said finally. I feel free. Mrs. Peterson squeezed my hand. Come over for tea. You shouldn't be alone right now. But I shook my head. Thank you, but I need to go home. I need to be in my house, alone, without fear for the first time in months. I drove home slowly, savoring the feeling of safety that was slowly replacing the constant anxiety I'd lived with for so long. When I walked through my front door, I stood in the entryway and just breathed. My house, my space, my sanctuary, reclaimed. I walked from room to room, touching familiar objects, remembering who I was before fear had defined me. The coffee table I'd refinished, the photos on the wall, the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals. It was all still mine. He hadn't taken it from me after all. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I cooked myself a nice dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, a glass of wine. I set the table properly, with a cloth napkin and my good dishes, and I ate in peace, in my own home, with no one to criticize or demean or frighten me. It was the best meal I'd had in years. The first night alone in my house, I slept for 12 hours straight. No nightmares. No waking up to check if doors were locked. No listening for footsteps or voices that signaled danger. Just deep, dreamless sleep. The kind that heals not just the body but the soul. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered. I was home. Really home. Safe. The weeks that followed were a process of reclamation. Daniel came with police escort to collect his belongings, and I stayed at Mrs. Peterson's house during the pickup. I couldn't bear to see him again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He took what was his and nothing more. The officers made sure of that. When I returned, I could see the empty spaces where his furniture had been. But instead of making the house feel hollow, they made it feel open, like I had room to breathe again. I started redecorating slowly. Nothing expensive. I was still living paycheck to paycheck. But I bought cheerful throw pillows, hung new curtains, placed fresh flowers on the kitchen table. I was making the space mine again, erasing the darkness that had settled into every corner. My sister called one afternoon, having heard through the family grapevine about the restraining order. Margaret, how could you do this to your own son? She demanded. I could have explained. I could have walked her through every moment of abuse, every instance of cruelty, but I was tired of explaining, tired of justifying my right to live without fear. He hurt me, and I protected myself, I said simply. If you can't understand that, I can't help you. There was silence on the other end. Then, surprisingly, her voice softened. Did he really push you down the stairs? Yes. Another pause. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was. I was ashamed, but I'm not ashamed anymore. We talked for another hour. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. She'd had her own struggles, her own moments of feeling trapped and powerless. We weren't just sisters discussing a family crisis. We were women recognizing each other's strength. At work, I walked differently, stood straighter. I'd always been reliable, always been pleasant, but there was a new confidence that my coworkers noticed. You seem different, my supervisor said one day. Lighter somehow. I am, I told her. I got rid of something heavy I'd been carrying. 3 months after the restraining order was granted, I received a letter from Daniel. It had been sent through his lawyer, in compliance with the no-contact order. My hands shook as I opened it, but Rachel had prepared me for this possibility. The letter was short. Mom, I've been going to the counseling the court ordered. At first I was angry, felt like I was the victim, but my therapist helped me see how wrong I was, how cruel, how I became the kind of person I always said I'd never be. I know sorry isn't enough. I know I can't undo what I did, but I am sorry. Deeply, truly sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I'm trying to become better. Not for the court, not to get the restraining order lifted, but because I finally see the monster I'd become. You were right to protect yourself. You were right about everything. I hope someday you can find peace. Daniel, I read it 3 times. There was no manipulation in it, no demands, no expectations, just an apology. It didn't change what he'd done. It didn't erase the fear or the pain or the months of suffering, but it was something. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have a conversation with him, with boundaries firmly in place. But not yet. For now, I needed to focus on healing myself. I started doing things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I joined a book club at the library, started taking walks in the park, not hurried trips between responsibilities, but leisurely strolls where I noticed flowers and listened to birds. I even signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. At 50 years old, I was learning how to live again. Mrs. Peterson became a true friend, not just a neighbor. We had coffee every Sunday, talked about everything and nothing, laughed about the small absurdities of life. She'd been widowed too, understood the particular loneliness that comes from building a life with someone and then having to rebuild it alone. You're an inspiration, she told me one afternoon. So many women your age, our age, we just accept what we're given. You fought back. I almost didn't, I admitted. I almost let him destroy me. But you didn't. That's what matters. 6 months after the restraining order, I got a promotion at work. Nothing dramatic. A shift to inventory management that came with a small raise in regular hours. But it felt significant, like the universe was finally acknowledging that I had value beyond my ability to endure suffering. I celebrated by buying myself something frivolous. A beautiful silk scarf in shades of blue and purple. It cost more than I should have spent. But when I wrapped it around my neck and looked in the mirror, I saw someone worthy of beautiful things. I saw myself. One evening, almost a year after everything changed, I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. My phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mom? Daniel's voice, tentative and small. My first instinct was to hang up. He was violating the restraining order. But something in his tone made me pause. I know I'm not supposed to call, he said quickly. I'll hang up if you want. But I'm moving. Out of state. Fresh start. And I wanted to say goodbye. And thank you. Thank you. The words surprised me. For stopping me. For not letting me become completely lost. I was destroying both of us. And you were brave enough to end it. That saved my life, I think. definitely saved yours. I didn't know what to say. This was my son, my child, and I felt complicated. Love and hurt and anger and hope all tangled together. I hope you find peace, Daniel, I said finally. Real peace. The kind that comes from being a better person. I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying. A pause. I love you, Mom. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. For everything. I'm sorry. I love you too, I whispered, because I did. Despite everything, that stubborn maternal love remained. But it was different now, tempered with wisdom, protected by boundaries. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Daniel. I hung up and sat in the growing darkness, letting the tears come. But they weren't tears of pain this time. They were tears of release, of closure, of finally letting go of the son I'd wished he'd be, and accepting the reality of who he was, and accepting that I couldn't save him. I could only save myself. The stars came out one by one, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. I thought about all the women like me, who'd suffered in silence, who'd endured because they thought they had to, who'd lost themselves trying to hold their families together. I wanted to tell them, you don't have to keep breaking yourself to fix someone else. I wanted them to know, your life matters, your safety matters, your peace matters. I wanted them to understand, love shouldn't hurt, and when it does, you have the right, the responsibility, to protect yourself. As I sat there in the quiet of my reclaimed home, I realized something profound. I hadn't just survived. I'd won. Not because Daniel had apologized or moved away or changed. I'd won because I'd chosen myself. For 50 years, I'd been taught that being a good woman, a good mother, meant sacrifice. Endless, silent sacrifice. I'd learned that my needs came last, that my pain didn't matter, that endurance was the highest virtue. But I'd learned something else too, that strength isn't just about how much you can bear. Sometimes it's about knowing when to put the burden down. I stood up, wrapped my beautiful silk scarf around my shoulders, and walked back into my house, my sanctuary, my home. Tomorrow I'd wake up and live another day of my reclaimed life. I'd go to work, where I was valued. I'd come home to a space filled with peace instead of fear. I'd make dinner for myself and eat it slowly, savoring every bite. I'd read or paint, or simply sit in comfortable silence. I'd live, really live, not just survive, because I'd learned the most important lesson of all, that at any age, at any point in your life, you have the right to start over, to choose yourself, to demand the respect and safety you deserve. I walked through my quiet house, turning off lights, checking locks not out of fear but out of simple routine. In my bedroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was 50 years old. She had lines around her eyes and gray in her hair. She'd been broken and had rebuilt herself. She'd been afraid and had found courage. She'd been lost and had found her way home. She was beautiful. I smiled at my reflection and she smiled back. A real smile, full of hard-won peace and quiet triumph. "Good night, Margaret," I whispered to her. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight, I was safe. I was free. I was home. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Because I'd learned that survival wasn't the victory. Peace was, and dignity was. And the courage to choose yourself, even when everyone tells you that you shouldn't. I'd learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I'd learned that the love you give yourself matters just as much as the love you give to others. I'd learned that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is say, enough. And finally, I was at peace. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all wounds had healed. Not because relationships were restored. But because I'd reclaimed my life, my home, my dignity, myself. And in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. I turned off the bedroom light and climbed into my bed. My bed, in my room, in my house. Safe, protected, free. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was simple but profound. I survived. And more than that, I won. Not through revenge or cruelty or bitterness, but through the quiet, powerful act of choosing myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest justice of all. Sometimes the silence that follows pain isn't emptiness. It's peace. And peace, Hard won and carefully protected, is the sweetest victory of all.